Daily commentary by the news director of WTFM International News, Fred Darwin.
The consistency of the United States foreign policy on protection of smaller countries from outside interference with their internal affairs is about to be put to a crucial test. It will be put to the test in the last place in the world the State Department would like to see it tested, the Middle East. That's the one portion of the international jigsaw puzzle which nobody at the State Department likes to talk about. But whether they like it or not, the issue is coming to a head. It is clearly drawn, it is not likely to go away by itself, and it will have to be faced. Our policy is to prevent communist expansion. And when that expansion takes the form of interference in the affairs of a target country by means of so-called wars of national liberation, we regard it as our duty to take countermeasures, to whatever extent is necessary, to preserve the integrity and independence of the target nation. That is the basis of our stated policy in Vietnam, where the government in Hanoi is using its own and local forces to destroy the government in Saigon. We intervened for the announced purpose of guaranteeing the South Vietnamese right to pursue their own destiny, free of interference by means of force and terror from their neighbors. Now there emerges in the Middle East an organization calling itself the Palestine Liberation Organization, whose ultimate purpose is the destruction, or as they call it, the liberation of Israel, and whose more immediate goal toward that end is the overthrow of King Hussein of Jordan, because of his unwillingness to go to war with Israel. When an organization of non-Jordanians based in Cairo openly announces that it is organizing a military effort to overthrow the government of the sovereign state of Jordan in order to bring about a change in the foreign policy of that country, and a change in favor of war at that, it seems there is little question we would have the same duty to intervene on behalf of Jordan, if not also on behalf of Israel, that we say we had in the case of South Vietnam. There isn't even any question that the outside threat is communist-inspired in this case as it was in Vietnam. The leader of the PLO made no bones about that in his latest announcement in Cairo. He declared for all the world to know that Red China has supplied him with arms and is training his recruits. Furthermore, he stated flatly that his so-called Liberation Army plans to operate with the methods of the Viet Cong in Vietnam. Even the name of his organization, the Palestine Liberation Organization, is a takeoff on the official name of the Viet Cong, the National Liberation Front. And if we are to prove that communist-inspired wars of national liberation will not be allowed to succeed, we will have to announce an unlimited commitment to defend the integrity of Jordan and Israel. If we don't, we'll be inviting aggression in one area while fighting it in another. This is Fred Darwin, WTFM International News, New York. This is WTFM News on the Hour. The Long Island Railroad canceled 9 late afternoon, early evening commuter trains today because of what it called a slowdown by members of the Brotherhood of Railway Carmen at its car repair shops. The line said it did not expect too much of a delay for commuters because we've picked the trains that would be least affected. The spokesman said the railroad was short of cars, so many people will have to stand anyway. The spokesman said the slowdown arose from the abolition of the jobs of 18 painters. He said the dispute was before a board of adjustment, whose ruling will be binding on both parties, but in the meantime, he said, we're just not getting the cars out of the repair shops. The spokesman said the railroad had gone to court over the slowdown. In Miami Beach, the scramble for delegates continues. James Brodsky reports.
Richard Nixon no longer acts like a man assured of the GOP nomination. At a morning news conference, he predicted victory on an early ballot, but would not join those who claim he'll win on the first vote. Since that time, he spent a busy day with various state delegations. The former vice president denied any erosion of his strength, but an informal canvass of delegates shows his hold on the South has weakened since California Governor Reagan announced his candidacy yesterday. Everyone, of course, is keeping count. Rockefeller supporters claim Nixon's strength has slipped to about 515 votes, over 150 short. A midday UPI poll, however, put Nixon's total at 648, just 19 shy. To add to the heat under which the convention is working, the Reverend Ralph Abernathy led his Poor People's Marches into Miami Beach and promised to keep the symbolic mule train in front of Convention Hall. James Brodsky, Miami Beach.
For more on the story of that Poor People's March, here is Bill Greenwood reporting from GOP Convention headquarters.
Carrying signs that demanded an end to hunger in the United States, members of the Poor People's Campaign have launched demonstrations here at Miami Beach. The first target was the Fountain Blue Hotel, convention headquarters, where the Reverend Ralph Abernathy appealed for aid to impoverished America.
You know, this is the richest country in the history of mankind, and there's no need for people being poor like these people are.
Reverend Abernathy said the Poor People's Mule Train would also join in the series of protests during the remainder of this week. Bill Greenwood at GOP Convention Headquarters.
Europe is following this convention very closely. Chris Lodge has the story from London.
Across Europe, newspapers and radio and television have followed with an acuteness never before seen today's developments in the Republican Convention at Miami Beach. Television brought live from the Convention Center today's Richard Nixon press conference. The convention developments even crowded out Britain's long-awaited proposal in Geneva that germ warfare be abolished. The Soviet press has so far remained silent on the quest for a next president. It is not expected to comment until after both candidates are selected. But in other Western nations, Europeans are being given a play-by-play summary of the latest developments, especially in the light of Richard Nixon's pledge to reunite Europe, including Britain, and patch up the thaw which has set in with President de Gaulle of France. Chris Lodge, London.
In other news, former President Eisenhower suffered another heart attack today, his third this year. At last report, he was reported in no pain, resting comfortably. President Johnson entered Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio today to undergo his annual physical checkup. The weather in just a moment.
Time on your hands.
The news director of WTFM International News, Fred Darwin.
What does it take to get instant action, bold, united, nonpartisan action from all branches of government, city and county, civilian and police, 1 week after an election? Obviously, a calamity of major proportions. And metropolitan New York has had its share of calamities in the past year, starting with the blackout, which followed the 1965 elections by about a week, followed by the transit strike and a host of others. So far as we know, there have been no changes in the law or the city codes as a result of the blackout, though it occurred over a year ago. Neither has there been any action to change the law on strikes by public employees, even though the Condon-Wadlin law was proved completely ineffective in the transit strike that paralyzed the city nearly a year ago. But in the calamity which struck this city about a week ago, there has been action aplenty by police and civic officials, including a nearly instant revision of the city license department codes, indictments obtained by the district attorney, and even immediate steps taken by Nassau County officials to prevent its spreading over the city line. That calamity, of course, is the attempt to introduce the West Coast topless waitress craze into New York City. We can't remember when so many have moved so fast to save the city from what they obviously consider a fate worse than death. And we say worse than death advisedly. There has been no such frenzy, no such flurry of activity in the courts over the discovery that some $200,000 worth of desperately needed life-saving equipment, including electrocardiogram machines and cardioscopes, some of which had been on order for over a year, were found stored in the basement of the city hospital at Elmhurst. Some of this equipment, in critically short supply at other city hospitals, had been lying there unused for 6 months to a year. The hospital's commissioner charged it off to red tape and said the city auditors were studying the situation. But there was no red tape and very little study of the topless situation needed to bring instant retaliation. It may well be that our survival as a center of culture and decency was at stake, and that this was a matter of greater urgency, but we doubt it. San Francisco has managed to endure in spite of topless waitresses for several years now. Upon what meat do these San Franciscans feed that they are so much better able to stand the shock than we New Yorkers? How are the people of Las Vegas and Paris and London so much better fortified than we residents of Fun City to withstand the display of undraped bosoms without crumbling into the dust? The charge against the waitresses is indecent exposure, But the mayor now says the same type of exposure is artistic at the African Ballet on Broadway. So apparently it isn't what you see, but whom you see and where. It's all too complicated for us. But at least we know now what you have to do to get action from City Hall. This is Fred Darwin, WTFM International News, New York. Dear Mr. Vice President, by the time you receive this letter, its contents will have been broadcast in the form of my daily commentary over this station, WTFM Radio, New York. And although it does not come under the FCC fairness doctrine, you have my assurance that any reply you may wish to make will be presented without editing and given equal prominence over these facilities. Last Friday, March 1st, 1968, in an address at Florida State University in Tallahassee, you declared that most of the people who criticize the position of U.S. Marines in Quezon simply don't know very much about the situation. You referred to these critics as experts from the press, radio, and TV, and you got a big laugh, followed by applause, when you quipped, "One thing we don't have any shortage of is experts." Your words as you spoke them, and the laughter and applause were broadcast on my 6 p.m. news, so I don't think there was any danger of slanted reporting. And I'm sure you weren't looking for laughs in connection with anything as serious as the situation of our young men surrounded by numerically superior enemy forces at Quezon. I understand perfectly that the laugh was in response to your good-natured barb at those reporters who regard themselves as experts. But I can tell you this. I do a certain amount of speaking myself at colleges and before various civic and fraternal organizations, and I've never gotten a laugh yet on anything connected with Quezon, the men there, their leaders, or their critics, nor would I wish to. This letter is written to you on a Thursday afternoon. As you know, each Thursday we receive the casualty figures for the preceding week in Vietnam, and it is the unpleasant task of non-expert news broadcasters to pass them on to the public. Today we were told that 542 Americans were killed last week, the second highest toll of the war, and just one short of the record 543 killed in the week of February 11th. In addition, 2,191 Americans were wounded last week alone. The casualty rate has more than doubled since the recent Tet Offensive, and well over 10% of all Americans killed in the entire war have died in the last 4 weeks. How many of them died or were wounded at Quezon is not revealed, but the number must be considerable. Experts or not, do we not have the right to ask what we are gaining at this terrible cost, and what these men are defending? Unless every reporter and analyst is wrong, all these men are defending is themselves, and that because they are surrounded and in a position where they can neither be reinforced nor evacuated, where there's only one metal landing strip, where 3 planes attempting to land have been shot down and almost every incoming plane has at least been hit. Whereas Newsweek magazine put it, all the Marines could do was dig in and wait in impotent rage for the North Vietnamese to launch a ground attack. Not being experts, most Americans also feel a sense of impotent rage at the military strategy of those officers who are experts and allowed 5,000 Marines to be trapped, cut off, and forced to endure a daily rain of artillery shells while the enemy digs ever closer and constantly reduces their strength. If you can supply any cheering facts, even reassuring facts, other than reports of enemy casualties, I and many of my listeners would be deeply grateful. Respectfully, Fred Darwin, WTFM International News, New York.